I'll never forget the way Emma's laugh sliced through the summer air that afternoon. Sharp, dismissive. It was the sound of someone who believed the world already belonged to her. The sun was sinking low over Colorado Springs, painting the sky in streaks of gold and coral, the kind of evening that made the pines hum softly and the air smell faintly of pine resin and barbecue smoke. I stood at the kitchen counter, sliding the last batch of my lemon butter cookies onto a cooling rack. It was my late husband Hank's favorite recipe, one I'd baked every summer since he bought this house with his bare hands and stubborn dreams. From the open window, I could hear the patio chatter. Emma's friends, lawyers, tech consultants, a couple from her yoga retreat, lounged under the string lights like they owned the place. Glasses clinked. Laughter swelled. My house, my land, my walls. Yet somehow, I was the outsider. I wiped my hands on my apron and stepped outside, carrying the warm tray like a peace offering. Emma stood at the center of it all. White sundress, expensive sandals, hair pulled into that sleek bun she'd copied from some influencer. Her fiancé, Tyler, hovered nearby, nodding at conversations he barely understood. "Cookies, everyone," I said, my voice soft but clear. A few polite smiles turned my way. Someone reached for a cookie and mumbled, "Oh, these are good." But Emma barely glanced at me. She waved her hand toward me with the same dismissive flick one might use to point out an antique lamp. "Oh, that's just Grandma Jo," she laughed. "She kind of floats around, makes herself useful." The group chuckled, not cruelly, just awkwardly. But the sound hit me like a sudden cold wind. My hands trembled ever so slightly. I lowered the tray onto the table. Tyler looked away. No one corrected her. No one said, "Hey, that's her house." I smiled tightly and excused myself. Inside, I stood at the sink for a long moment, staring at my reflection in the window. The same reflection that had watched over this home for decades. I'd hosted birthdays, anniversaries, neighborhood barbecues here. Hank and I had built a life in these walls, one paycheck at a time. And now, I was background noise at my own gathering. Emma's laughter drifted in again, high and confident. She was 27, with a sharp tongue and sharper ambition. I'd raised her after her parents passed. I'd been the one who stayed up through her fevers, packed her school lunches, drove her to piano lessons in the snow. I gave her everything I could, and somewhere along the way, she learned to treat kindness like a free resource. 3 days later, it happened again. I was in the kitchen early in the morning, pouring water into the kettle. I reached for my favorite ceramic mug, Hank's old world's best grandpa cup, when my elbow grazed a tall glass on the drying rack. It shattered on the tile floor with a sound that cracked through the quiet house. Before I could bend down, Emma appeared in the doorway. "What did you do now?" she barked. I froze. I just knocked over a glass. I'll clean it up." She held up her hand like I was a child interrupting an adult conversation. "You need to know your place, Grandma," she said, her voice low, tight. "Don't think living here gives you a free pass to mess things up." "I'm sorry," I whispered, crouching to pick up the shards. She stared down at me. "You're not owed anything, not a thing. You're lucky I let you stay here." I looked up at her slowly, the pieces of glass cold in my palm. "This is my home, Emma." She laughed, not kindly, but like she'd just caught me in a delusion. "Not for long if you keep acting like this." She pulled her phone out of her pocket, thumb hovering over the screen. "You think I won't? I'll call the cops right now and tell them you're trespassing. Try me." For a heartbeat, I thought she was bluffing, but then I heard the dial tone, watched her press the phone to her ear, heard her say, calm as ice. "Yes, I need to file a trespassing report." I didn't stay to hear the rest. I walked out the back door barefoot, into the small herb garden Hank and I had planted decades ago. The morning sun was too bright, the air too sharp. My rosemary bushes brushed against my calves, smelling of a simpler time, when Emma was a little girl chasing butterflies through the grass, not a woman standing inside my kitchen threatening to erase me. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not a spark, a click. This wasn't my home anymore, but it was still my house. And for the first time in a long while, I felt wide awake. When Hank and I first stepped onto this property, the house looked nothing like it does now. The paint was peeling, the porch creaked like an old fiddle, and the chimney leaned just enough to make the inspector frown. But Hank had squinted up at those mountains in the distance, grinned, and said, "This place has good bones, Joe." Just like us. It was 1979. We didn't have much, but we had grit. Hank worked double shifts at the rail yard, and I taught at the elementary school down the road. Every paycheck, every extra dollar went into this house. We sanded, painted, nailed, and scrubbed until the place stood proud against the Colorado sky. This house watched us raise children, plant gardens, argue over paint colors, and dance barefoot in the kitchen on Friday nights. It saw us through blizzards, barbecues, heartbreaks, and laughter that echoed against the wooden beams. When our daughter passed in that car accident and Emma, just 7 then, came to live with us, this house became her shelter too. She slept in the room with the little dormer window, the one Hank built a bookshelf into himself. I'd sit by her bed at night, holding her hand as the wind howled through the pines, promising her she was safe here. She used to call this place our fort. After Hank died, the house felt too big, too quiet. The ticking of the old wall clock started to sound louder, like it was counting down something I couldn't name. Emma was in college by then. She came home for holidays, sometimes summer breaks, always full of stories about law school dreams and city life. She'd hug me tight, call me my JoJo, and for a moment, I'd feel that little girl again, the one who used to help me plant tulips along the walkway. But over time, her visits got shorter. The hugs turned to quick pats on the shoulder. She started correcting me about everything. The way I decorated, how I handled the bills, what modern homeowners should be doing. I told myself it was just growing pains. Ambition, youth. When she graduated, she asked to move back in for a while, just until she found her own place. I agreed. Of course I did. She was my granddaughter. She belonged here, or so I thought. At first, it was small things. She rearranged the furniture, replaced my floral curtains with gray linen ones. "Minimalist," she said, "you'll love it." My ceramic dishes disappeared, replaced by sleek white plates from some catalog. My knitting basket was stored away to declutter. Then came the rules. No cooking with garlic. It lingers. No TV after 10 p.m. Tyler and I need a calming nighttime routine. No hanging laundry outside. It ruins the aesthetic. I laughed the first time she said aesthetic, but she wasn't joking. She started calling the living room our shared space and my kitchen the open plan area. She hung up a framed print in the hallway that read, "Good vibes only." Hank would have rolled his eyes so hard the frame might have fallen off. One day, she came home with Tyler, a quiet, pleasant enough young man who smiled a lot but never really looked me in the eye. They started spending weekends here, then weeks, then months. Before I knew it, they'd practically moved in. Their sleek espresso machine sat where Hank's old percolator used to be. They held dinner parties with their friends, young professionals with loud opinions about property investments and interior design. They talked about my house like it was a project, a canvas. Meanwhile, my world shrank. I retreated to my bedroom most nights, knitting quietly with the TV volume low so I wouldn't disturb anyone in my own home. I boiled garlic during the day when they were out. I folded their laundry just to keep the peace. I swept the porch every morning out of habit, not thanks. And every time Emma laughed at my old-fashioned habits, every time Tyler called me ma'am instead of Grandma Joe, something inside me dimmed a little more. The worst part wasn't the rules. It wasn't even the way my garden pots were banished to the shed because they cluttered the patio. It was the way she looked at me, like I was temporary. Not family, not history. Just an old piece of furniture waiting to be replaced when the new set arrived. I told myself I could endure it. That love meant patience, that if I stayed quiet long enough, maybe she'd remember who built this life for her. But the silence didn't build bridges, it built walls. One night, I came downstairs for a glass of warm milk. I stopped halfway down the steps when I heard their voices in the living room. "She's just always there," Emma said, her tone sharp. "She's your grandma," Tyler mumbled. "She's emotional clutter," Emma snapped, "like a box you don't have the heart to throw away." My hand tightened on the banister. The house was dark, but my ears burned hot. Emotional clutter. That's what I was now. I backed away slowly, returned to my room, and sat on the edge of my bed until sunrise. I didn't cry. I didn't confront her. I just listened to the tick of that old clock and realized something. My silence wasn't protecting anyone. It was being mistaken for weakness, and Emma was learning to build her future on top of that silence, brick by brick. It was a Thursday afternoon when the line was crossed, not with a scream, not with a fight, but with a single phone call that made my hands go cold. The house was silent except for the hum of the old refrigerator. I was folding laundry, not just mine, but Emma's and Tyler's too. I'd matched their socks perfectly, like I always did, a little habit Hank used to tease me for. The sky outside was pale and overcast, the kind that made the pines look almost black against it. The phone rang. It was my bank. "Mrs. Johnson," the woman said politely, "we're calling to verify some details regarding your recent mortgage application." My stomach nodded. "I haven't applied for a mortgage." A pause. Papers rustling. "It lists your property on Ponderosa Lane, in your name. The primary applicant is Emma Reed." The room suddenly felt smaller. I gripped the receiver. "Excuse me?" The woman continued, careful, like she already sensed something was off. "The application states that Emma Reed is the homeowner and that she's applying for a home equity line of credit to remodel and refinance. It's quite detailed. We just need to confirm a few ownership documents before proceeding." "I'd like you to send me copies," I said, my voice calm. Too calm. Within the hour, an email arrived. I clicked it open on my old laptop, the screen flickering slightly in protest. There they were, neatly scanned PDFs, Emma's name on every line that mattered, claimed inheritance, claimed full ownership, claimed I was elderly and under her financial care, and there, at the bottom of the page, was a shaky imitation of my signature. Not just disrespect anymore. Theft. I sat there in silence for a long time, the laundry forgotten on my lap. My heart wasn't racing. If anything, everything inside me went still, like the hush before a snowstorm. When Emma came home later that evening, she swept through the door like she always did. Earbuds in, keys jingling, phone buzzing. Tyler trailed behind, scrolling through something on his screen. I waited until she reached the kitchen. "I spoke to the bank," I said. My voice didn't waver. She froze mid-step. "What?" "I know what you did." She blinked, caught between pretending ignorance and doubling down. "You shouldn't be poking around in things you don't understand, Grandma." "I understand perfectly," I said. "You forged my signature. You tried to take this house." For a heartbeat, I saw panic flash across her face. Then it hardened. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Look," she said sharply, "you're not getting any younger. You don't work. You don't contribute. All you do is exist here." My fingers curled against the kitchen table. "I cook. I clean. I keep this place together." "You breathe," she interrupted, like she was tired of explaining gravity to a child. "You think just because you've been here forever, you own this house forever? That's not how the world works anymore, Grandma. You're living in the past." Her voice was cold, efficient, like she was finalizing a business deal, not betraying the woman who raised her. I took a slow breath. "It's my name on the deed, Emma. Mine. Hank's and mine. You weren't even born when we built this life." Her lips curled. "You think that matters? Paper means nothing. I live here. Tyler and I have plans. This house should be working for us now, not sitting here frozen in time because you can't let go." "Emma," I said softly, "this is theft." She laughed then, a sound I'd never heard from her before. It wasn't her usual bright, performative laugh. It was low, cruel. "Theft? You've been freeloading off your own nostalgia for years. We're just making this place useful again." And then she said it, the sentence that froze everything inside me. "If you don't cooperate, you'll be out of here in a week. I'll make it happen. One phone call, grandma, trespassing, elderly confusion. No one will believe your word over mine, not anymore." I stared at her. Not the little girl who used to hold my hand in the storm, not the teenager who cried on my shoulder when she got her first heartbreak, but a stranger wearing her face. She picked up her phone, scrolled as if the conversation was already over, and in a way it was. That night, I lay awake in bed, listening to the wind whip against the siding. The old wall clock ticked steadily. Normally, that sound comforted me. That night, it sounded like a countdown. I realized something sharp and undeniable. Emma didn't just want the house. She wanted me gone. And for the first time since Hank's funeral, I didn't feel sad. I didn't even feel betrayed. I felt cold, clear, certain. She thought she was playing a game she'd already won. She had no idea she'd just opened the door for me to end it on my terms. It was just past 3 in the morning when I opened my eyes and knew exactly what I had to do. No trembling, no second guessing, just a kind of stillness I hadn't felt in years. The house was silent. Even the refrigerator hum had clicked off between cycles. Emma and Tyler were upstairs, likely wrapped in their 1,000-thread count sheets, dreaming of open floor plans and equity loans. I swung my legs over the side of the bed. The wooden floor was cold beneath my feet, grounding me. I reached for the suitcase under the bed, the same one I'd taken on my honeymoon with Hank, worn leather, brass clasps dulled with age. It creaked softly when I opened it. Inside, I packed only what mattered. A few changes of clothes, my worn leather wallet, the marriage certificate Hank and I signed in 1961, his death certificate, and the deed to the house, folded neatly inside the original manila envelope, still smelling faintly of cedar from the drawer where it had slept for decades. I hesitated at my nightstand. There was a single photo in a silver frame. Hank in his wedding suit, grinning like he'd built the world with his bare hands. Me, in my homemade dress, cheeks flushed with the thrill of starting something new. I wrapped the photo in one of my scarves and slid it into the suitcase. Then I sat at my little desk and wrote a note. It wasn't long. It didn't need to be. "Emma, I don't hate you, but I'm done begging for space in a house I paid for with my life. I have nothing left to give and nothing left to ask. Joe." I folded it and placed it beneath the porcelain teapot Emma had declared too kitschy and shoved to the back of the counter months ago. It felt poetic. I slipped on my shoes, zipped the suitcase slowly so the sound wouldn't echo, and walked toward the back door. The moonlight spilled across the hallway floorboards, silver and soft. I paused for just a second at the threshold and looked around. This house had been everything. The backdrop to my life, my shelter, my heartbeat. Now it was just walls that no longer heard me. I stepped outside. The spring air was cool against my skin. The pine trees swayed gently in the breeze, and somewhere far off a dog barked once, then went quiet again. My rosemary bushes brushed my skirt as I passed, survivors of decades of storms and summers. I didn't look back, not once. I walked to the edge of the property where my old truck was parked under the elm. I climbed in, turned the key, and listened to the engine cough to life like an old friend shaking off sleep. Headlights off, I rolled down the driveway in silence. I drove west toward the outskirts of town to a modest roadside motel I remembered from years ago. Clean, quiet. The kind of place where the night clerk doesn't ask questions if you pay in cash. The room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and something floral. I set my suitcase on the bed, sat down on the edge, and stared at the flickering TV screen with the sound off. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was purposeful. From my handbag, I pulled out a worn business card. Daniel Weaver. Attorney at law. Retired. Hank's closest friend. He'd been the best man at our wedding, had stood beside me at the gravesite, and had sent me Christmas cards every year since. If anyone could help me, it was Daniel. I dialed the number. It rang twice. Joe? His voice was groggy but alert. I need to talk, I said, today. He didn't ask why, he just said 10 a.m., my place. I slept little that night. Not because I was scared, but because, for the first time in years, my mind was clear. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was planning. At 9:45 the next morning, I rang Daniel's doorbell. His bungalow sat on a quiet street framed by cottonwood trees. He opened the door in slippers and a cardigan, his reading glasses perched on his forehead. Well, if it isn't Trouble herself, he chuckled softly, stepping aside. Come in. The smell of fresh coffee filled his kitchen. We sat at the table where he and Hank had played cards 100 times. I slid the manila envelope toward him. She forged papers, I said simply. Daniel raised his brows and began examining each document with the careful eye of a man who hadn't lost his edge. She can't do this, he muttered. Not legally. You hold full title. If anything, she's committed fraud. I leaned back in the chair. I want to sell it, Daniel, the house, all of it, as soon as possible. He looked up sharply. You're sure? Yes. A slow smile spread across his face. Then let's make sure she never sees it coming. He made a few calls that morning, his old attorney voice slipping out like a well-oiled tool. By lunchtime, he'd lined up a realtor, someone he trusted, and started drafting protective clauses to ensure Emma wouldn't have any legal way to interfere once the listing went live. I walked out of Daniel's house feeling lighter than I had in years. The pines swayed overhead. The sun broke through the morning clouds. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't clinging to the past. I was setting a trap in the present, and Emma had no idea the floor beneath her feet had already begun to shift. Jessica Tran's real estate office sat on a corner of Main Street, tucked between a bakery and an antique shop that always smelled faintly of old pine. The glass door chimed softly when I walked in. She looked up from her desk, sharp blazer, hair in a neat ponytail, warm but businesslike smile. Mrs. Johnson, she said, standing. Daniel told me to expect you. How can I help? I took a seat, smoothing the fabric of my skirt. I want to sell my house, I said, quietly, quickly. No open houses, no gossip, no time for anyone to interfere. Jessica tilted her head. Is someone trying to block the sale? Yes, I answered simply. Her expression sharpened and she nodded. Then we'll handle this delicately. I'll work with serious buyers only. Private showings, tight paperwork, no leaks. By that evening, Jessica and I stood outside my house. My house. I stayed in the truck across the street while she walked the perimeter, clipboard in hand, her heels clicking softly against the porch boards. Hank had nailed himself. She took photos of the Victorian details, the mountain backdrop, the garden that still bloomed despite years of Emma's neglect. She paused at the rosemary bushes, brushing a stem between her fingers and smiling. This place has soul, she said quietly. I nodded once. Then find someone who will treat it that way. She did more than that. She moved like a storm in disguise. The next morning, at exactly 8:14 a.m., the listing went live. 3 crisp photos, a clean description that highlighted the mature trees, original woodwork, and ownership since 1979. No mention of Emma, no mention of occupants. By 10:00 a.m., Jessica's phone was buzzing. By noon, 3 buyers had booked private viewings. By 4:00 p.m., she called me at the motel. Joe, we have 3 full-price offers. One of them is from a woman named Diane. Divorced, mid-50s, all cash. She's not just buying a property. She's looking for a home, and her offer is the cleanest I've seen all month. I didn't hesitate. Take it. She emailed me the contract an hour later. I sat on the motel bed with my reading glasses perched low, scrolling through the terms. It was all there. Immediate closing, no contingencies, verified funds. Jessica had locked it down tight. When I clicked sign, the sound of the mouse felt like the softest rebellion I'd ever made. By sunset, the house wasn't mine anymore. And more importantly, it wasn't Emma's either. She didn't even know the ground beneath her feet had changed hands. I spent that night sitting on the small balcony of my motel room, sipping mint tea from a paper cup and watching the traffic below. The city lights flickered like fireflies. I thought about Hank, how proud he'd be of this quiet, precise strike. The next morning, a courier arrived at the house with a certified envelope. Emma signed for it without reading the sender's line. Inside were the documents. The legal transfer of ownership to Diane Westfield, notarized and filed with the county. Attached was a formal notice of tenancy termination, 7 days to vacate. The envelope bore one simple sender name, J. Johnson. Not Grandma, not JoJo, just me. I wasn't there to see her face when she opened it, but Jessica told me later that Diane's lawyer confirmed Emma called her within an hour, frantic. She tried to dispute the sale, claiming she was the real owner. Jessica calmly replied, "All documentation is verified. Mrs. Johnson was the sole legal owner and executed the sale within her full rights. This conversation is over." Then Emma called me. The phone rang while I was stirring sugar into my tea. Her name lit up the screen. I didn't answer. She called again and again. 7 times before I'd finished brushing my teeth. No voicemails, no apologies, just control clawing at a door I'd already locked. By the time afternoon rolled around, word had started to spread through the neighborhood. You can't keep a secret like that in a place like Colorado Springs. Mrs. Patterson from next door spotted the courier, and by evening the whispers were flying over fences like birds. "Did you hear? Joe sold the house. Emma's getting evicted." No way. That was her grandmother's place. No, it was Joe's. Always was. I didn't need to be there to hear it. Gossip has a way of finding its rhythm. By Friday, it wasn't whispers anymore. It was a low, steady hum. Cars slowed when they passed the house. Neighbors lingered longer at their mailboxes. Emma's friends from the fitness club didn't stop by that week. Tyler started spending more time at his mother's place. And Emma, well, the queen of the house suddenly found herself sitting on a throne with no kingdom. All the while, I stayed silent. Because silence, when used right, is louder than any scream. Emma had always cared about appearances. She liked to stand tall on that porch, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown, greeting neighbors with breezy confidence as if the house behind her was a testament to her success. But by the 3rd day after the notice arrived, that confidence had started to crack. I wasn't there to see it firsthand, but Colorado Springs isn't a place where secrets stay buried. The whispers reached me even in my little motel room downtown, carried like wildfire through Mrs. Patterson's book club and the retired fire chief who walked his Labrador past the house every morning. They're saying she got evicted. No, it's a legal sale. She didn't own the place. She forged papers, can you believe that? Grandma Jo sold it right out from under her, cold. The story grew with every retelling. Some exaggerated, some got it exactly right. But all of them shared one truth. Emma had built her little kingdom on sand, and the tide had come in fast. Tyler, who had always played the role of the agreeable fiancé, started to fold under the pressure. His friends had invested in a renovation scheme he'd bragged about. "We'll flip the place. Easy equity." Now, with the sale finalized and the eviction clock ticking, those friends started calling, and they weren't calling to chat. One night, according to Mrs. Patterson's niece, who lived 2 doors down, the shouting started. Tyler's voice echoed through the open upstairs windows. "You told me this place was basically yours." "It was," Emma yelled back. "It is. She can't do this." "She already did," he shouted. "You forged her signature, Emma. Do you understand what kind of mess this is?" There was a slam, then silence. The next morning, Tyler loaded 2 duffel bags into his car. Neighbors watched from their driveways under the pretense of watering lawns. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't help Emma pack. He didn't even look back at the porch. When Emma tried to hand him one of her suitcases, he stepped back. "I'm going to my mom's," he said flatly. Then he got in the car and drove off. She stood there on the curb with 2 expensive suitcases, a silk robe knotted tight at the waist, and that same stunned expression she used to give when she lost an argument as a teenager. Only now, no one was stepping in to help her. By midweek, the legal timeline was clear. 7 days. No extensions. The house was already legally Diane's. Any protest Emma raised was met with polite, firm replies from the buyer's lawyer. "Please vacate by the stated date. Failure to comply will result in legal eviction." And so, the woman who once made house rules for me now found herself living under someone else's countdown. I heard she tried calling Jessica, the realtor, pretending to be the owner to reverse the sale. Jessica shut it down in seconds. She called me too. 24 times in one day. No voicemails. Just her name lighting up my phone screen like a flickering sign, Emma. I didn't answer. That silence rattled her more than any argument ever could. The neighborhood gossip shifted tones after that. At first it was shock, then fascination, then slowly a tinge of satisfaction. She thought she ran the place. Well, looks like Grandma ran it better. Imagine getting kicked out by your own grandma. She must have really pushed her. I didn't have to say a word. They did it for me. Meanwhile, Diane, the new owner, handled everything with quiet efficiency. She scheduled her movers for the Monday after the vacate date. She never contacted Emma directly, except through her attorney. She wasn't cruel, just firm. By Saturday, Emma's carefully crafted image had shattered. Her friends stopped dropping by. The fitness club group chat went quiet. Even the women from her office who used to sip wine on her patio stopped defending her. On the final day, she stood on the front porch with sunglasses too big for her face and lipstick applied a little too perfectly, like armor. But the bags under her eyes told the real story. I imagined her scanning the street, looking for some last-minute rescue, some loophole, some miracle. None came. The moving truck she'd hired arrived late. She argued with the driver. She yelled at Tyler's voicemail. She made 3 calls to me in the span of an hour. I let everyone ring. By late afternoon, she was gone. The house stood quiet again. Diane's team moved in 2 days later, efficient, respectful, and humming to themselves as they carried boxes inside. Mrs. Patterson said it was the calmest the neighborhood had been in years. And me? I was sitting in a small apartment on the 24th floor downtown, sipping tea and watching the city stretch out beneath me. For the first time in a long time, I felt no weight on my chest, no guilt, no ache, just the kind of peace that comes when you stop trying to save someone who doesn't want saving. But I wasn't finished yet. Emma thought the worst had passed, that all she'd lost was a house. She didn't know the real blow was still coming. It was a cold evening when she finally showed up. The city had one of those quiet spring nights where the air turns crisp as soon as the sun slips behind the mountains. From my 24th floor apartment, the skyline glowed softly. Rows of warm windows and neon signs reflected against the glass like distant stars. I just brewed a cup of mint tea, the same way Hank liked it. The apartment was still new to me. Smaller than the house, but clean, quiet mine. The faint hum of the city below had become my lullaby. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders, carried my tea to the window, and watched the street stretch out below. Then the buzzer rang. I glanced at the intercom monitor. For a second, I thought I was imagining it. But there she was, standing at the gate of the building, hair disheveled, makeup smeared, clutching a duffel bag like it was the last piece of her old life. Emma. She looked nothing like the polished young woman who used to bark rules at me across the kitchen. Her coat was too thin for the night air. Her hands trembled as she pressed the buzzer again. "Grandma," her voice cracked through the speaker. "It's me, please. Let me in." I didn't answer immediately. I just watched. She glanced around nervously, probably aware that people from the nearby cafe could see her standing there. The same Emma who loved to perform for her neighbors now stood under a harsh streetlight, exposed, no audience to control. "Please," she said again, her voice softer this time. I don't have anywhere else to go." A part of me, the part that had raised her, held her through fevers, bandaged scraped knees, stirred. Old instincts don't die easily, but over that, colder memories settled like frost. Her laugh at that summer party, her voice calling me emotional clutter, her thumb hovering over 911. I stepped out onto the small balcony. The night air hit my face. From up there, she looked small. Her head tilted upward, and when she saw me, her eyes widened with something I hadn't seen in years. Hope. "Grandma," she called. "I'm sorry, please. Just for a night. I'll figure everything out. I need you." Her words echoed faintly against the building. I didn't speak right away. I let the silence stretch. The same silence she had once filled with rules, dismissals, and forged signatures. Finally, I leaned against the railing, looked down at her, and said quietly, "Emma, don't ever think you can trick an old woman, especially your grandmother." Her face faltered. "Grandma, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. She clasped her hands together, like she used to do when she was 5, praying for a new bike. "I have nothing. No house, no Tyler, no one else. I was wrong." I believed her. In that moment, I truly did. But belief didn't mean forgiveness. I didn't lecture her. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just turned, stepped inside, and pulled the curtain closed. Her voice echoed faintly through the buzzer one last time, then silence. I didn't watch her walk away. I didn't need to. I'd spent years begging for space in my own home. She'd spent years mistaking my silence for weakness. This was me reclaiming both. I set the mug of tea down on the table. My hands weren't shaking. My chest wasn't heavy. There was only a calm, steady certainty. Outside, the city kept moving. Cars rushed through glowing streets. A siren wailed in the distance. Somewhere below, Emma's footsteps faded into the night. For the first time in a very long time, I felt no obligation to look back. Weeks passed. The city outside my apartment moved on as cities always do. I settled into a routine that felt like breathing after holding my lungs tight for too many years. Mornings with tea and sunlight streaming through the balcony window, afternoons wandering the farmer's market without checking the time, evenings watching the lights flicker across the mountains, mint plants growing quietly in pots along the railing. Emma stopped calling after that night at the gate. Her number disappeared from my recent calls like a chapter finally closing. For a moment, I thought maybe that was it. The house was sold. She was out. Silence had done its work. But there was one thing Emma never understood about me. While she was scheming with fake documents and quick shortcuts, I had been documenting everything. Daniel, my old friend, the retired attorney, had helped me file not just the house sale, but something else. Something she hadn't even imagined I'd do. The day after I left the house before signing the sale papers, I had handed Daniel a copy of the forged mortgage documents Emma submitted to the bank, along with the email chain, along with the notarization attempt using my falsified signature. Fraud isn't a family dispute. It's a felony. Daniel had quietly forwarded the evidence to the district attorney's office. "You don't need to press charges yourself," he'd told me. "This is already on record. If they decide to pursue, it's out of your hands." I hadn't thought much more about it. My revenge had never been about prison cells or spectacle. It was about reclaiming what was mine. But I also knew actions have consequences. and Emma had written her own ending long before I walked out that door. It was a late afternoon when the news came. I was watering my balcony plants, humming to myself when my phone buzzed. It was Daniel. "They're moving forward," he said simply. 2 weeks later, the knock came, not on my door, but on hers. Mrs. Patterson's niece, bless her nosy heart, sent me a text that evening with a photo. Emma stood on the sidewalk outside her temporary rental, hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing a hoodie far too big for her, staring blankly as 2 officers handed her a folded packet of papers. The neighbors stood at a polite distance, pretending not to watch. The charges weren't for eviction. They were for attempted mortgage fraud and falsifying legal documents. The same neighbors she used to impress with fancy brunches and designer patio furniture now whispered in small circles as the squad car idled at the curb. No handcuffs, not yet. Just a slow, quiet serving of reality. She'd have to appear in court. Tyler didn't show up. Her friends didn't either. When she finally lifted her head and saw Mrs. Patterson standing across the street, she froze. The whispers spread faster than wildfire that night. "She forged the papers?" "They say the bank flagged it first." Can you imagine? Against her own grandmother. I didn't smile when I heard. I didn't gloat. I just sipped my tea and stared out at the city lights. Revenge isn't fire. It's frost. It waits. It settles. It creeps into every crack they never thought you'd notice. Emma had mistaken my silence for surrender. She'd built her throne on stolen paper and arrogance. And now, that paper was evidence. The day of her arraignment, I didn't go to the courthouse. I didn't need to. The outcome didn't matter to me anymore, not in the way people expect. My victory wasn't in a verdict. It was in the stillness of my apartment, in the knowledge that I had taken back everything she tried to take from me. Legally, quietly, permanently. Mrs. Patterson described it to me later, though. Emma arrived alone, shoulders hunched, eyes hollow. Gone was the confident hostess. Gone was the woman who dismissed me like background noise. She stood before the judge like someone finally realizing that every choice has a price. I think that was the real punishment. Not the legal process, but the public collapse of the illusion she'd built. Back on my balcony that night, the mountains were silhouetted against a violet sky. The mint leaves brushed against my fingertips. The city hummed below like a steady heartbeat. I closed my eyes and thought of Hank, of paint-splattered summers, dancing in the kitchen, laughter under string lights. The house was gone, but the memories weren't. And for the first time in a long time, those memories felt unburdened. Emma had written her ending when she chose deceit over love. I had simply signed it.